Go ahead, Kuntal.
Yeah, thank you, Saurav. Thank you for the go ahead. And good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to another webinar by the Destination Knowledge Center. Today is session number 2 of Museums of Delhi. This is from our three-part series on the museums of Delhi. We had, on session 1, we covered these 6 museums, which are the more famous ones. The National Museum, the National Gallery of Modern Art, the Craft Museum, the Sanskriti Museums, the Ghalib Museum, and of course the Streets of Delhi, which are the open air museums. If you missed this webinar, you can go to the DKC website. The webinar, the recording of the webinar is there and you can have a look. On session 2, we are going to cover these museums. The Gandhi Smriti, artist Peter Blake Studio turned Museum, the Gallery of Musical Instrument and Masks of the Sangeet Natak Academy, and many more interesting museums, about 9 or 10 of them. And to take us on this journey, we have Seema Srivastava with us. Seema needs no introduction. She has been with us on many webinars, and she had stood like a rock with us during this initiative of ours. Thank you, Seema, for so much. But for those of you who don't know Seema as yet and maybe logging in for the first time, Seema Srivastava is an art historian, culture theorist, teacher, and a designer. She is qualified with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Delhi and an MA and MPhil from the National Museum Institute, New Delhi. Seema also conducts museum visit, heritage and art walks and craft experience in collaboration with and for Prime travel companies. Thank you, Seema, for joining us today. And Seema is in Calcutta right now with her family, and she looks very happy with it. Okay, Seema, before we jump into today's webinar, I saw this today morning and I thought, let me just put it out. It's a beautiful quote I felt of Jerry Saltz, the American art critic, which says, "Don't go to a museum with a destination. Museums are wormholes to other worlds. They are ecstasy machines. Follow your eyes to wherever they lead you, and the world should begin to change for you." Tell us more.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Kuntal, for having me here again. And it's always very exciting to have so many listeners, and I get to do all the talking. And museums, of course, I'm extremely passionate about them. And as this beautiful quote says, I don't think you can have an agenda when you go into a museum, because it's like a curiosity shop. You know, you just enter in and there's a maze of interesting things. So the idea is you can't just plan, today I'm going and I have to see this and that's it. When you enter into a museum, and it's not about that the right door leads to masks, the left door leads to shoes or whatever. The minute you enter in, it has some kind of amazing experiential level. You just keep discovering as you move. And as you get more connected or have a love affair with artifacts, you tend to find new paths to explore even more. So I think that is the beauty of this whole world of art and museums, where there's a lot of surprises round the corner and you don't know what you'll really come across. And the more you get connected to it, you tend to find newer paths and newer ways. And from one museum, sometimes you go to another, just because of these kind of interesting mazes that you go through. Well, that's the way I feel about it.
Right. Thank you, Seema, so much. You know, indeed, museums are wormholes to another world. You know, I was just visiting the National Museum of Colombo, Sri Lanka, and this particular artifact, it's a 5th century gold earring, Kundala. You know, it just kind of, it drew me towards it, you know, and I was baffled with the beautiful design and the artistic skill. And I was thinking, you know, what kind of person the jeweler must be, you know, who created this masterpiece some 1500 years ago. I mean, this tiny little piece kind of drew me towards it. And I think that is the magic of a museum. That's what I feel, you know, where You just follow wherever your eyes lead to, and then the world begins to change for you. Indeed, I think, thank you, Seema. We are going to jump straight into it right now. Museums of Delhi session 2, which is from a 3-part series, and we're going to jump straight to Gandhi Smriti. Over to you, Seema. And I'm going to turn off my video to save some bandwidth, and I would suggest Seema to do the same,
So I'm going off my video, and only you'll be able to hear me. I hope that's fine with everybody.
That's fine.
And especially, okay, great. And can you hear me clearly, everybody?
Yes. Seema.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
And so we're starting with this amazing museum. I don't think any of visitors coming to Delhi, or people in fact come all the way to Delhi sometimes to visit this museum, dedicated to, of course, the great father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. Now, it's extremely exciting to tell you that this is just one of the dozens of Gandhi museums that we have. And in fact, Delhi itself has more than 4 museums dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi himself. But I sometimes get a bit biased, and I find this particular museum the most experiential when we want to understand his life. And as it's been said, my life is my message. That is what Mahatma said. And I think this particular one, makes all the possible sense to it. Next, please. I think maybe we'll go to the next one, and I could start here. Now, this is, of course, located at 30th January Marg, which is actually the location where he was assassinated, as many of you would be knowing, on the 30th of January 1948. It's an absolutely beautiful 12-bedroom house, which was built in 1928 by Ghanshyam Das Birla. And Birla Sahab himself was a great connect. He had a great connect with Mahatma himself. And Gandhiji spent the last 144 days of his life in this particular house. And I think the best part about this museum is it has a great visual aspect to perpetuate the memories and values and the noble ideals that he represented. And it's extremely pictorial. It's got a lot of photographs, memorabilia, and some extremely simple elements about his life. When we talk about Mahatma Gandhi, we always refer to his life as one of total simplicity. So as you enter, you can see this beautiful sculpture. And in the background, you'll notice a lot of pictures and drawings. What is interesting is that he somewhat becomes an inspiration for artists, for painters, for photographers, for sculptors. And that's one of the other amazing parts. It's also, this museum is like a book, because as I was saying, that the more you enter in, it, just a minute. Is the screen getting disturbed by any way? Kuntal?
Seema, everything is fine. You can continue.
Okay. I think something just popped up on my screen, so I just wanted to get rid of it. It's like an open book, because as you walk through it, the walkthrough is absolutely brilliant. Got a lot of wonderful sayings, messages, and little excerpts of his life, right from childhood on to his, political participation, and to his beautiful humanitarian kind of contribution that he had. Also a man with a great sense of humor. There are some beautiful little quotes which show us the lighter side of him, or of course his oratorial side of him. He was never an orator as a growing up young man, but he became a great orator as he grew older. Next, please. I was mentioning, if this, when I look at my own bedroom, I wonder, wow, so much clutter. This is what it was. His life was so simple. It's a room which has hardly any kind of his physical, paraphernalia. This is his personal bedroom, the one which he used. And what is interesting is I was really looking for an image. Whenever you enter, I was looking for an enlarged one, but I couldn't. But if you notice over here, you'll notice the three iconic monkeys, speak no evil, hear no evil, and see no evil, which becomes such an important message that he wanted to tell everybody. And then, of course, his little charkha or his spinning wheel. Now, the charkha, of course, has had a very important role to play in his life, which I'll just tell you in a minute. And of course, the biggest bolster. Always very busy talking. He had visitors over here. This place was, of course, a place where he talked and gave advice to a lot of people. The last 144 days of his life, um, thousands of people used to come and visit him. And he had a lot of things to tell people, advices to people in the rural areas. India had just gained independence and there was a lot of problems happening. And he would do his little writing here, a little spittoon, and of course his Bhagavad Gita, which was always here. A man with very, very simple life, just one stick and two pairs of footwear, one wooden clogs and one pair of handmade leather chappals. That's all that he had at, his personal belongings. Next, please. I love the fact worldly remains. If we look at it, it just got a few very interesting things which he used on a daily basis. Of course, his iconic spectacles, which of course went on to becoming such an important iconic fashion thing as well. And his sickle, cutting fresh grass to feed the goats when he was at the Sabarmati ashram or wherever he was. And apart from that, you'll notice a fork and a knife and a spoon. Don't forget, when he got his Bharat Law at the Inner Temple in London, when he was studying at the University College of London, he was a simple man from Gujarat, and when on going there, he definitely learned a lot of, the Western style of a lifestyle, although he remained a vegetarian. And you know that his vegetarianism was quite an embarrassment to him to begin with, because his friends would make fun of him. They said to him that, Mohandas, you are going to gradually disappear in the air because you don't eat anything. And he realized that vegetarianism was, of course, a discipline based on his own life that he had gone through. But also, he found a group of people like-minded to him, and he became the treasurer and then the secretary of the World Vegetarian Society, and he started writing for them. There's a very interesting anecdote. I know we are always rushed with time, but I have to tell you this, and you people might just like it. While he was in University College of London, he sent a letter to his family back in Gujarat, and he said, I required 50 pounds. And of course, his father was worried. Why does he want such a big amount in those days? And, everyone in the house was very worried. And then his brother, spoke to him and wrote to him, and he said, what has happened? And have you got someone into trouble? Or have you done something wrong that you require so much money? He said, now, what has happened is that I was sent to England with a lot of promises to keep. Don't get involved with a lady, and don't ever drink, and don't eat meat. Now, how do I spend the evening? My friends go to the pub and they are doing such exciting things. So I have decided to join ballroom classes, and I'm learning dance. And so I need to get a pair of good shoes and a tuxedo to dance. And that is why I need the money. So I thought that was such a sweet story. And then, of course, you notice over here is typically very important, his watch, which he always had with him. And on a closer look, you notice that it stops at 5:17. 5:17 was the point when he was shot, and the watch stopped at that point. Few elements again, but tell us a lot about him. Next, please. The charkha, of course, this is a beautiful charkha, again from a collection of a lot of spinning wheels that became a very important point in the philosophy of Gandhi about the conversation of self-reliance. We are all familiar with all the history that we have gained in many years of our school and college lives, that we know how non-violence and this whole concept of self-reliance was such an important part about his campaigns for the independence, and making khadi, or the fabric that really sort of proved to show everybody, and especially the Western world, that we are self-reliant. And it was kind of a wheel, or the chakra, which tend to move forward with people progressing, with making their own fabric, and then on, of course, going on to becoming the symbol as part of our national symbol. So this is a charkha which definitely talks about self-reliance and our moving forward in the time of the control of the British over here. Next, please. Very, very interesting imagery. There are two of them. The one on the left, of course, that is Sardar Patel, also known as the Iron Man. And this is something, and a lot of people believe that this is the last meeting that he had on the day before he walked out on 30th January. But this used to be the kind of scene in his room in this house practically every evening. Sardar Patel and a lot of these national leaders felt such a kind of a solace by just getting mentored by a person like Gandhi. And I think that was one of the things. On the right side, of course, the picture shows him with his nieces, and they always accompanied him on his wonderful walk from inside to the garden, where he would have a congregational meeting, and inclusive of that were the bhajans. It was a wonderful ceremony kind of thing every evening, when there was some beautiful bhajans that he was very fond of, that he actually addressed the people and they sang with him. And they were all sort of getting a lot of strength just by talking to him as India gained independence at that point. Next, please. These galleries are absolutely beautiful. Sometimes, people say it's always empty. And I have been very happy that there are practically very few people, or it has a lot of space where you can have your own tete-a-tete. It does require time. I don't think anyone can go and see this museum in half a day or 2 hours. And, it's always written on these brochures, 2 hours to 3 hours, or, sites. But I always feel you can spend your lifetime here. There is so much to learn from Gandhi. And I think that's something which, and it covers all kinds of aspects. His time at Pune. I must tell you, when I was mentioning that more than 3 to 4 museums in Delhi itself, but it's surprising when we think there are north to south to east to west, absolutely brilliant museums dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi, right from Barrackpur in the east, and especially because his associations with every part of the country, whether it's Patna, where he had a very great association, there's a beautiful museum, or in Barrackpur, or in Pune at the Aga Khan's house, where he was arrested and kept on house arrest, where of course Kasturba, his wife, also breathed her last. And Margaret Bourke-White, the famous photographer from Life magazine, came and did this beautiful photo shoot and a lovely photo essay, which was published in Life magazine. Or down in Madurai, there's a beautiful Gandhi museum. If any of you are on that side, visit the Gandhi Museum in Madurai, which again not only has a section about Gandhi, but especially about the foreigners coming in from 15th century. That's about 1489 when we started having the visits of the foreigners, and this is what it's got a nice background, and then they connect it with Gandhi. So of course, and then Sabarmati Ashram and Ahmedabad and Porbandar. So Mahatma Gandhi, of course, has a lot of fan following all over the world, as we know, and this is about it. Next, please. Okay. This is actually a very poignant place. It's made me cry. I'll tell you, it's made a lot of my guests cry. They've stood here. They've walked up. They've always wanted their own time and space. Everything comes to stand still. There is a date and a time written there, but people just stop and they actually are able to picturize that last moment by themselves, when he must have said, "Hey Ram," and Nathuram Godse, at hardly any distance, using a Beretta, shoots him straight and he says, "Hey Ram." So this particular martyrs column is definitely one of the very, very major highlights of this particular museum. Uh, and uh, the whole ambience with gardens and flowers, it's something like a resurrection, you know. It's something that maybe he will not going to be around, but you know, his values will always stay. Now here I just want to, you know, I was just thinking that there are very few men who have ever had so much of an effect on our world as Gandhi ji. And he seems to be so relevant. In fact, Kuntil and I were having a little chat a couple of days ago. And, you know, he had asked me a very interesting thing, that how come, he's so relevant in our lives today. And I think he'll remain. Now, obviously, all of you hearing might have your own personal opinions about the Gandhi's philosophies, Gandhi's political thoughts, or a lot of people even there's a controversy about why, what happened and everything. But there is something which is actually beyond all that. And I think it is that Mahatma Gandhi stands for certain values and beliefs that our nation has adopted over the past few centuries. He's not only on our currency notes, please remember. These are the embodiment of virtue and goodness, peace and harmony. You know, as our political history is so ridden by loot and plunder at the hands of outsiders, it becomes even more imperative that we remain a humble nation so that we can grow on our own terms while keeping our values intact. And Gandhiji taught us countless lessons about life, leadership, humility, persistence, discipline. You know, he was so skillful to even construct bridges of empathy with people. And you know, he always said something. He said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." And I think that was an amazing thing about him, which I think I would like to continue believing in and try to practice. I think all of us have to practice it somewhere in. Hello? Yeah. This is a very interesting one of his childhood. There is this whole, but this one is taken from the National Gandhi Museum at Rajghat. As I was telling you, that Rajghat, of course, is another very iconic place where we have actually got a memorial for Mahatma Gandhi. He's, of course, I haven't covered that for the museum collection, but there is a museum over there, again, having a large number of photographs, memorabilia from his life. So people who want to know even more, closely about his life and about the different aspects from politics, on social life, his love for villages and love for doing humanitarian aspects of promoting children and widows and setting up self-reliant ashrams. You must visit these two museums. I think you will really enjoy. The best part is it's so well documented. So many photographs from his life are all over. And that is, I think, what you would really enjoy here. Next, please. He has always been an inspiration, as I told you, for artists. This is a beautiful sculpture done by a very famous artist who's, of course, he's done a lot of sculptures. All artists have sometimes in their life made sculptures of Gandhi. This one especially is a good point to again convey this amazing message that he always shared through his bhajan. His mother always taught him the most beautiful values of life. And, he always said, call those people Vaishnavas who feel the pain of others, help those who are in misery, but never let self-conceit enter their mind. And this is what I've grown up with, my daughter grew up with, and I'm sure many of you and your kids or families grow up with, is वैष्णव जन तो तेने कही जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे पर दुखे उपकार करे तोय मन अभिमान ना आने रे. And these are lines which are something I start my day with, and many a times I think that's the little bit that we can all share of Gandhi in our hearts and lives forever. Next, please. Okay. So moving away from, of course, a bit of an emotional to another very kind of an emotional thing. Imagine your lives without music and dance. And India is one country which has had centuries and centuries of history of Tal and Vadya. We were one of the nations of the world. Our country has lots of texts and Shilpa texts and beautiful written material about Natya Shastra and the importance of music and dance and music and society, rituals connected to dance and music. And this is the Sangeet Natak Academy, Gallery of Musical Instruments and Masks. I hope you've noticed that I have added addresses on most of them, so that in case anybody is living close to 35 Firoz Shah Road near Connaught Place, can peep into it whenever it opens up. These are some of the very lesser known places in the museum list. And it is a pity, because though they are extremely not very large museums, their collections are actually incredible collection. And what is interesting was that the fact is that when something becomes such a part of our lives, we start taking it for granted. For instance, music, culture, music and life. Music is such a part hai, music hai. Kabhi people don't ever think that they should, conserve, preserve many such instruments which are not even used today. Today is in fact a digital world to a great extent. People are turning out music with digital instruments. Imagine there was a time when people would just take a twig and make a hollow out of it and make something which looked like a flute or sounded like a flute maybe. And so this particular museum has a wonderful display of not too much, but about 250 musical instruments. Again, divided into percussion, wind, string, and of course the ideophonic and melodic ones. For those who don't know what the difference would be, of course, the drums, percussion, wind, of course, anything like flutes and shehnais, string, anything like sitar and veena. And when I say ideophonic, that would mean anything like majiras or tongs and chimtis. And finally, melodic. If those who know that you can also use nature, like something like a jal tarang, using a bowl with water and creating the most sublime kind of music. And so all these examples are over here. Next, please. On the left, of course, you can see the sitars and you can, so again, over here, it is very interesting. It's not only a museum, as we were talking, it's a curiosity space. So you have somebody, a guide, who actually can tell you about the details of the origin of instruments. We all know that, of course, India had, as Bharatvarsh had a great origin of many of these musical instruments. Not only that we make a beautiful vegetable curry using gourd, but gourd becomes one of the very important parts of the resonator of the veena and the sitar. So I remember telling, I told somebody, a guest, I said, this is a pumpkin and we don't only eat it, we also play music with it. And, that was on a light-hearted moment. But the transition of it from Rudra Veena, Vichitra Veena to sitar and many other stringed instruments, or even things like the tabla, which was devised actually from a pakhavaj. For those who know, pakhavaj is a bigger drum. And, they decided that, okay, this is one piece of drum, but to get more kinds of music, and of course, with the coming of the Persians, where the change came with sitar, santoor, rabab, and the sarod. There was also a very big change that came with percussion instruments. And this is the big pakhavaj that was divided into two, becoming a tabla. The larger side called baya or the left, while the narrower side called dahina or the right one. Next, please. This is the section which is my favorite at this museum. And this is the section which is concentrating on masks. Now, these are not masks just that we have to display on our walls and feel good about it. These come from regions of our country and they are still being used. It could be, I mean, you know, what is beautiful is that they are still used, and they are still used in parts of dance, drama, skits, theatrical performances. They are used for rain. They are used for warding of evil spirits. They are used to scare away things. They are used for humor or hasyaras. They have got a kind of extra force. They make the person have a dual power, one that is earthly and one that is spiritual or mammoth. And as you can see, many of them have a very interesting primitivism about them. When I use the word primitive, they seem to be from a time period that we can't even fathom. It could be a time period when people had no clue. They were living in jungles. You go into the interiors in Northeast also, you know, you go to Arunachal Pradesh or Sikkim, or come down to Madhya Pradesh or Jharkhand or Assam. Every state has these beautiful masks. It is so unfortunate that many of us have no clue. So whether it is the Chow dance from West Bengal or Odisha or Jharkhand, or we go to even the beautiful Buddhist dances from Tibet, where the Cham dance is performed, or the Theyyam from Kerala, or the Mahakal from Sikkim, or the Monpa from the Northeast. I think everywhere what we find is an amazing kind of a representation of these images. These also show us a beautiful idea of the way they craft it. You know, using wood, using lost wax process and metal. A lot of them are in wood, depending on the regional. Like imagine going to Andhra Pradesh and you find them using jackfruit, that is kathal, and that wood is got a great kind of luster when it's polished, and it's got a kind of sturdity about it. Or some made of paper mache, colored. Like for instance, even this Hanuman is very close to me because I have one at home. It is from Banaras. Banaras, as you know, is the place where the origin of Ram Leela. And they have one of the most beautiful Ram Leela performances even today over there, which starts from one bank of the river Ganges and goes up to the other. And every day the scenes move in locations which are, audience moves with it. And these are made in Banaras by these lacquer workers, and it's a small industry of mask making there as well. Next, please. I don't know if any of you know that there is on Baba Khadak Singh Marg, very close to the Emporia, there is this amazing little museum called the National Handicraft Design Gallery and Earth Treasures Museum. You know, when I'm teaching to students, many of them say that, ma'am, does everything have a history? And I said, of course. You could have a toothpaste museum, I'm sure, or a toothbrush museum, to a thread museum, to a cloth museum. You could have museums of everything. And the reason for a museum is also to understand the origin, the development, the transition, and to respect and appreciate the things around which we live and the ones which we consume or we are part of. And this was started in a new building called the Rajiv Gandhi Handicraft Bhavan, which has been set up to promote a lot of lesser known kind of ideas. Now imagine this has a whole section of wooden blocks. We know hand block printing done in many parts of the country, Rajasthan being one. And here they've got a beautiful showcase of all the national award winners who actually carved onto wood. Look at the intricacy of the wood carving, all done by hand. Why is it in a museum? It shows us how block printing or tradition of making of wood, and moreover here, it was the earth treasure. Wood is a natural treasure from around. Nature being given a very important kind of respect here, and how wood has been used. Next, please. It's a small museum. It's got a very small collection. And when you look at it, you said, oh God, should we call this a museum? Do we ever realize we look at a sculpture maybe at Cottage Emporium, or we see it at any of the museums, or we go to one of these emporium from Delhi Art Emporium or any of these shops selling these artifacts. And we look at it, and many times I have very little clue about the material it is made of. So whether they are fossils or gemstones or crystals or rocks, look at this beautiful shivling. It's absolutely unbelievable. And so using this kind of highlights are part of this very small, modest museum, opened only in 2009. And I think it's interesting as it grows, we'll get to understand more of it. Next, please. Such an iconic building of Delhi, a slice of history very much presiding in it, even today as the president presiding in here. And this building, of course, taking you back to the time when Delhi was made a capital, the early 20th century, the early 1900s, 1912, when Rashtrapati Bhavan was made as the residence of the Viceroy. A lot of us kept looking from outside and thinking what would be inside. The curiosity stayed. I mean, as long as I was a kid, I never got a chance to go anywhere close to the inside, except for the Mughal gardens, which were the gardens adjacent to the Rashtrapati Bhavan, well, in the presidential estate itself, which was the only intrigue during February when it was open for a few weeks, when we would visit and see the beautiful Mughal gardens, as they were called, again showing the influence on the British, or Lutyens or Baker, and their beautiful inspiration coming from the beautiful Mughal gardens created, and their desire to be one of us by creating this Indo-Saracenic architecture with beautiful influences coming from Hindu art, Islamic art, Buddhist art, well, the stupa or the dome or the chhatris or the eaves, and a lot of other elements. And of course, the Greco-Roman columns coming from their own background of academic art that they were taught back home. And this remained an intrigue, and we kept hearing that there was something happening in the Darbar Hall. But for now, many years, Rashtrapati Bhavan has been open on particular days and times on special permissions and special tickets. You can go and see some sections of this beautiful building. And next, please. We never expected that we could actually go and see the Ashok Hall or the Darbar Hall, the banquet hall and drawing room. I once had a visitor, and when he came in and saw this particular room, and he immediately said, I don't think we all have to only talk about Palace of Versailles anymore, because this is a very majestic kind of not only architecture, but the surface patterning with amazing frescoes and silk carpets, and embellished with beautiful paintings done by Indian artists, also Western artists, chandeliers, which each piece is very intricately crafted, and these walls and ceilings completely taking us to a very different kind of world of Versailles, and showing us that amazing pomp and kind of style with which the British lived. And I think that is one of the reasons when Dr. Rajendra Prasad moved in here as the first president of independent India, he was overwhelmed by the size, the stature, and the majesty of this whole place. He decided that he is going to choose one of the smaller and more modest guest rooms as his bedroom. And can you imagine, he went on to staying in that. And most presidents have continued living in that, because this was too much. It was over the top. But this shows us the grandeur, and it's somewhat now definitely makes me feel very proud of our whole Indian culture and the majesty. And it talks about the time of the Maharajas and all that fact. Also, I think you should know that the whole Rashtrapati Bhavan, when it was made on Raisina Hill, the land itself belonged to Maharaja of Jaipur, who of course went on to, was one of the very close associates of the Viceroys also. So next, please. Okay, so you can see the drawing room. These are still also used, but on the days of the visits, they are open for people to come. And but you know, I'm just going to tell you, every day when you know the museum, this place and its private section of the museum, they keep changing, and sometimes they are closed for visitors. So don't always believe that this room would be open when you reach there. It might be closed at that particular time. This is only about Rashtrapati Bhavan. The rest of the museums, they are generally the same way as they have been. It's also interesting is that if you are planning to ever go to Rashtrapati Bhavan or are in that mood, although I said no destinations fixed, you can actually do it like a 3-chapter book or a 3-phase visit. Rashtrapati Bhavan used to have an amazing collection of art and artifacts. You know, all the dignitaries, right from the last Viceroy to even the Viceroys before, a lot of collection went back to England. But, you know, most of the presidents have been visiting all over the world, and they have been given such beautiful presents and gifts and, you know, awards, and those were displayed all over. What happened was it suddenly became too cluttered. And they said that there's just no way we can put everything into this main building. And that is why a second section was opened in the form of a new building, which I will be telling you very soon about. So next, please. This is, of course, the famous Darbar Hall. You know, the dome that you see from outside the building is exactly on top of this. Many of you must have seen this building whenever there is a telecast of any presidential award. And this, of course, is an absolutely beautiful hall. Again, accommodates the who's who, and most of the important awards are given here. Behind the chair, you see the beautiful Buddha from the Gupta period. And it's one of the most amazing artifacts which is part of this collection here, although there are many more. Next, please. Yes. So, as I was telling you, they realized that it is not only difficult to keep the, you know, all the collections in the main building. Also, they realized that sometimes it was important for people to just come in and freely move and understand more stories connected to not only the presidents or people who lived inside the Rashtrapati Bhavan, but the whole, the major events, iconic events. You know, everybody knows about the iconic events that have taken place, the freedom at midnight, when the oath taken by Pandit Nehru. And everybody has seen that particular little film on the, you know, you know, at the strike of midnight or whatever, or June the 2nd, 1947, when that final point happened, when it was decided that the partition would take place. Now, these are things one will miss when they go inside the Rashtrapati Bhavan. So, as you know, that the presidential estate is so large, and it had many buildings, which were not even being used properly, and 2 such buildings that were spotted were the stables and the coach house. And this particular building that you see in front of you was one of the stables. And it was decided that they would convert these buildings. First of all, they would be preserved and also convert them into a great extension of a museum to revive the history of our democracy. And many collections from Rashtrapati Bhavan were moved over here into the Rashtrapati Bhavan Museum. It's an amazing place. I will be very honest, I visited it last year. It was opened in 2014. But unfortunately, and this might be a question for the travel company people here, I don't know how many of you have ever put it on itineraries. And I would recommend that this is an absolutely brilliant place for a lot of foreigners who want to get an idea about the history of India to be brought here. And it could be an absolutely wonderful day spent, half a day spent over here, and the extensions, and especially because it's located right there, very close to, the hotels or the heart of Delhi. It just seems to fit in very well in itineraries. And so this was created in 2014, though there were stables, and yet you can see some old coaches and carriages parked. Let's go inside and see what it's inside. Next, please. Of course, it never a harm to start with this beautiful Lion Capital, a replica, of course. Again, it's wonderful because this talks about the philosophy, the beautiful philosophy, whether it's about Buddha, we talk about Ashoka, or we talk about how the beautiful philosophy of being majestic and yet having the humility. Look at the way the smaller animals, I think we all know how the goat and the cow and the bull and the lion and things like that together, and the whole concept of the chakra and the values all inculcated through this national symbol. It's a wonderful place where you can give a very chronological as well as a very wonderful walkthrough. Let's go ahead. Next, please. Paintings and beautiful images and recordings of those particularly significant events that happened in India, which go on the world map this night, that changed the history for India. I think that's very important. And these are large paintings done by great artists. And that is the best part. This museum gave opportunity to a lot of artists and sculptors and painters to make these beautiful photographic paintings of these occasions. And you can actually identify with a lot of people in it. And it's a wonderful place to take kids as well, to understand history through pictures, and rather than making them sit through textbooks maybe sometimes. Next, please. This is another new kind of, we know of the Madame Tussauds and we know of the Wax Museum in the West. This is absolutely wonderful. This beautiful little round table conference depicting that particular 2nd June 1947, that historic meeting for the consent of the partition, where you can see the important members seated here while they take the decision. So this is just one of the many such images that you will notice inside this particular museum. Next, please. The famous Dandi March. We all know of this if we are ever on Sardar Patel Marg, and we have seen this iconic sculpture. Again, over here, it's been, revived or made once again. These are such iconic points in our history. And, there's always some beautiful music playing in the background here. And it's such a pleasure to see it all around you. You seem to become a participant. I always say when you're in a museum, and if the display, I said in the first lecture, when I took the last one, I told you how important it is to display things beautifully. It's very important. So many people work at the lighting, the display, its presentation, its arrangement. And this Dandi March here makes sense because it's again part of the chronology of the history of India. This is a later edition, and I'm so happy with this one. Sometimes we think and say, oh, I don't know what kind of cups and plates did they use. What was the kind of crockery that Lord Mountbatten used to have his boiled egg in? So now we know, most probably this is where, this is the crockery that was used. Well, yes, they have done a beautiful collection of the crockery and some cutlery that was used during just the time when the British were here. And later on, of course, when the presidents of India have actually entertained important people, these are the iconic historic pieces of old lovely bone china. Some of them, of course, the Royal Doulton, and some coming all the way. These were very beautiful pieces, Wedgwood of the presidential house as well. Next, please. Of course, entertainment would have also included alcohol for special guests, and these are, of course, the little chains and lockets to hang on the bottles for identification. And lovely collection. This is a very sweet place for those who enjoy knowing more about culinary objects, pots and pans of the time. This collection is very interesting. Next, please. On the left side, it's a beautiful hand-painted teapot, a Japanese teapot. And on the right side, the old khansamas used these particular kind of pots and pans. They have been brought out from the treasures of the old time kitchens of the Rashtrapati Bhavan, and they are all in display over here. Next, please. I don't know, while I'm talking to you, how many of you have ever visited this particular building called the Teen Murti Bhavan, also today known as the Nehru Memorial Museum. It used to be the Flagstaff House, and it was made during the time of the British for the Commander-in-Chief. And it is only after independence that Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, moved in over here and spent quite a few years staying over in this particular house. Can we go to the next, please? Next, please. Yeah. I'm sure many of you, of course, are familiar with the Bharat Ratna, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who, of course, became the first Prime Minister of independent India, had a very, very important role, again, to play with our national movement. Also, the father of Indira Gandhi. And this particular home was his house for many, many years, where he lived with his daughter and his grandchildren. And again, his personal belongings and letters and the copies of his beautiful books written, including Discovery of India, which of course is one of my favorites, which he wrote between 1942 and 1945, all actually exhibited over here. Next, please. This is very, very intimate again, very little, very beautiful. His table has just been maintained like it could have been. His phones. Museums are also great to see the way products existed. I think many of the young generation might not have ever even seen a telephone like this. Today, these telephones don't exist, or his chair, or, the simplicity, the artifacts, a few last letters that were written by him, some files that were kept over there. And what is interesting is that this is where he actually would meet people. One very, very important thing that I must tell all of you over here is that whenever you are visiting these museums, they have some amazing guides to travel with you. Nehru Museum has its own foundation, and they have actually trained people into the lives of Nehru, his philosophy, and they'll give you a wonderful walkthrough. So you can't enter it, you can only go up to the door of this room, and then you can move ahead. Next, please. His bedroom. A very simple yet very, very, interesting way to understand a person. This is where he spent his time before he passed on. And of course, again with him, born in Allahabad, as many of you would know, he got his early education there. Then he went to England, where he went to study at, I think it was Cambridge, where he went, Trinity College, where he did his course in natural sciences. I was wondering, because he went and did his bachelor's in natural sciences before again he went to the same Inner Temple at London, I think part of University College London, and got his barristership there. And then he comes back and because of his father and grandfather, both very much involved in the nationalistic movement, his father, especially Motilal Nehru, who was a very, very close connect to Mahatma Gandhi. That's how he got to meet Gandhiji. Initially, he was not very impressed when he heard about who this gentleman was. But after a couple of meetings with Mahatma Gandhi, he's completely floored. And he just jumps into this whole, freedom movement. And he contributed a lot. Of course, I'm not getting into politics today. I'm not wanting to talk too much about what their roles was. That could be for some other day when we are doing some historical aspect of our nationalistic movement. But this is something, looking at somebody's such personal spaces is again a very interesting thing. It's an intrigue. It's intriguing to see his spectacles kept over there, or his books, or his book table, or even I can see the Angelo Poise lamp, which was, of course, a trend of that time, or the tapestry. I think it just moves us to see somebody so closely, even if he's not there. There is that air or the spirit of that person which sort of is there, the essence of their lives is always there. Next, please. This is, of course, where he met the ministers. He would have, if he wanted to meet more than 2 or 3 people, this was another particular room. And what is beautiful here is look at the picture that's kept on the table. It's Mahatma Gandhi. And you know what? Again, today, I don't know, it's getting so much about Mahatma Gandhi, but that's really interesting, is that he had such a kind of impression. He left such an impression on people. I was reading somewhere, Indira Gandhi, Madam Indira Gandhi was married to Feroz Gandhi. But Feroz Gandhi's surname, he was a Parsi, and his surname was actually Ghandy, Gandhi. He was a Parsi. But when he got into the National Congress and he met Mahatma Gandhi, he decided to change the spelling of his surname as a kind of a homage to this great man. So you can imagine the way he touched everyone's lives. And again, of course, that famous painting, which is also seen on a postage stamp, where Nehruji and Gandhiji are seated together on one of the sessions of the Indian National Congress. Next, please. Can we go to the next? Yeah. So we are at Indira Gandhi Memorial, a much more newer museum than many that one has seen earlier. Indira Gandhi, of course, as we all know, again had a very, very important role as a prime minister, former prime minister, one of the, I might be wrong, but one of the prime ministers who got 3 sessions together as a woman. She actually served from 1966 to March 97, and then again 80 to 84 before she was assassinated. So this was the house on 1 Safdarjung Road where she lived. Again, a very dynamic personality, made some amazing changes in the policies of this country. Also very controversial with a certain many issues, but today is our day for museum visit, when we want to know where she lived and where, unfortunately, on that day, 31st October 1984, it was her own bodyguards who assassinated her, resulting from some of the impact of what had happened in Amritsar before that. But what is interesting again, when we visit this museum, we again get a wonderful slice of life of her as a very important member of the nationalist movement, as part of the Nehru-Gandhi family, also her important role as part of the Vanar Sena, or her terms as 3 consecutive terms, as I just mentioned, or her education right from Mussoorie to Shanti Niketan to Oxford. And of course, her wonderful connection to her 2 sons and her relationship with her daughters-in-law and the rest. So let's go in and see. I have a couple of slides. So next, please. Yes, that's the entry point, of course. Again, this is the house. You can see, even though we notice very little, you can see the architecture. Again, these were the colonial houses, as you all know. We've seen many such bungalows all over Latin's Delhi. And this particular one is where she spent a substantial amount of time meeting people and living over here. Next, please. Her beautiful library. She was an avid reader. Her love for reading and writing began, of course, very early. It was also when her father, being in jail, wrote to her these amazing letters, which we know of our father's letters from a father to his daughter, or the discovery of India, I think is one of the biggest. She herself said that, my family and everybody was so involved in the, the freedom movement. I never really, and I was out of the country, or I never really got my dad to sit and tell me lovely stories about India. How could I discover my own country? And I think it's not really wrong that Bharat Ek Khoj, or Discovery of India, that beautiful book. And then, of course, her academic training, her love for reading all kinds of literature, which began at Visva Bharati at Shanti Niketan, where she spent a lot of time. And so this is her library, come her reading room. She had a wide collection of art. She was a connoisseur of collection of paintings and art, which are all over here. People can really actually walk through these sections and get a feel of the kind of life she must have led. Also, one very interesting thing I've always found, maybe as a woman, in awe of another woman who did so well in her life. She did a lot of sacrifices, please remember, and yet that maternal instinct in her, these things are visible when you look at photographs over here and things like that. Next, please. Yes, I've seen people suddenly getting very sad. They have a face which sort of shows their, a kind of a sadness. You feel pathos. Her last outfit when she was assassinated, her jhola, a little bag, her love for Indian handicrafts and her saris. I was attending a symposium some years back where we were talking, we're just generally catching up on fabrics and saris. And a lot of people said, Madam Gandhi had one of the most beautiful collection of handloom saris. And I know, I'm just mentioning it because in this museum, you can also see some of her collection of a wonderful love for collecting fabrics from all over the country. She knew about different kinds of clothes and fabrics, and she had a lovely collection of handicrafts. So it does get a lump in your throat when you stand here, but this is preserved very well. It's been curated very well, and I'm quite proud of this new museum opposite the Gymkhana Club in Delhi at Safdarjung, which seems to be always full up. I've never noticed it having very few people. Next, please. I can't imagine. This is such a beautiful picture. It's so intimate. I know we're having a sort of a museum conversation, and this is Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahu Thi, or Saas Bahu, and what a wonderful connection. It talks about a lovely friendship that they had. A lot has been read, but imagine seeing pictures. Whenever we look at politicians, we very rarely get a chance to see their intimate or their personal lives. And I think thanks to museums, as Kuntil said, he's taking you through wormholes and making you connect to these wonderful, quaint corners of seeing their more maternal instincts or seeing their personal views. Next, please. This is the point of assassination. Of course, this is the path she took. They've actually now covered it, and it's covered with glass. And every day they there's clear glass. And as it says, the walk has been covered with crystal, suggesting a river in flow. They generally lighten it up at night. Again, this is that important point. Many museums have got actual fire which burns 24/7, like at Teen Murti, which is the house of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, or this particular one, artists are getting new ways of showing symbolic or conceptual aspects of people's lives. And I think this is another thing museum gives an opportunity to artists, is to create contemporary and yet very subjective and also you can say symbolic aspects of showing the transience of life, but to show the flow of her values or her presence in a a kind of a flowing form. So many such things have been added into museums to make the experience even more exciting or even more fulfilling. Next, please. So we have been, today's journey has been a little more morose in the sense that we have talked about 2 or 3 leaders who have actually created quite emotional, effect on our lives. So now suddenly I look at this one and somewhere it starts looking like my studio, clutter. I love this one. And this is interesting because, we still have one more part to go through. But, this is the one I really wanted to show. And this is for each of you participants, 152 I see. Many of you would have your own collections. This whole conversation that we are having, which is one-sided, of course, but till now I'm talking. How many of you might have trunks at home where you have photographs of your great-grandfather? You might have a talwar of your grandfather or a salwar of your grandmother. Okay. You might have medals which were collected by your brothers or nephews or granduncles during their wars, some MBEs or OBEs. Somebody became a Rai Bahadur during the British time. Or if nothing, some of you visited Beraghat and picked up a stone piece from there, and then you went to Karnataka and picked up something from Hampi, and you could be having your own collections of 100 to 200 to thousands of pieces. And this is a wonderful thing to maybe inculcate to some of you who are married to your kids, if you have kids, who have their own little collections. When they walk out and they see a feather on the street, let them pick it up. Please don't say, of course, be careful, it's the COVID time, but everybody can have their own little museums. And I think that is something very, very important. And this kind of little museum spaces can be created in your house. You can have your bar set up in it. I've been a designer by profession, so I don't mind sharing something very aesthetically, it could be done. You want to create a bar and just put all these medallions and things around. I'm not a hunting person, so I do not like animal heads anywhere, stuffed animals, but you could have little things, certificates, all, and make your own museums. So this was a common thing when people and artists no. You can create your own museums. And this is something which is very new in our country. And there was a reason for talking about it. It's pretty popular in the West. Having these kind of artists who set up their own museum. Time I talked about Ghalib Museum. It was something like that. One room museum. But Ghalib didn't create it. We created it in his space. But today, artists, as they live, or as they're departing their families, have decided to convert their homes into museums and creating those spaces for you to see. Next, please. So coming to Sehgal, and many wonder who this Sehgal. No, this is not KL Sehgal, or this is not your friend Ravi Sehgal, but this is a very important modernist sculptor from our country, Amarnath Sehgal. Now, you might say, I've never heard of him. Many of the people don't know about him. I, of course, know from him. He was a guru in my college. I'm from College of Art, Delhi. He taught many, many years before I was there, and he was already gone away. And then, but we had heard of him. We had seen his works. And Mr. Sehgal, of course, was born before partition in Pakistan. And then, of course, he traveled to Banaras Hindu University before partition. came to India, stayed there for a while, then taught and became a master sculptor. But at a very, very young age, he decided to move to Luxembourg. Now you'll say, then why are we seeing his museum? We never got to see his works because he was so much more intrigued by his popularity in Luxembourg. You know, he had done some work in an exhibition at Luxembourg and they invited him with open arms and he couldn't say no and he went there. But his love for his country, his experiences of the partition had been so strong in his mind that he always did a lot of work influenced by that. Now he lived in Europe, don't forget. Europe, of course, was budding with modern artists. There were artists like Giacometti. Maybe some of you have heard. Giacometti is one of the gurus of European modern sculpture. And Amarnath Sehgal gets very, very influenced by the works of these artists and works in Luxembourg till 2004, after which he returns to India. But it is unfortunate that after that, he passes on in 1985. Now, a lot of his collection, you will be surprised to know, is in Canada, in Toronto, and it was bought by the owners of the Bata Museum. Now, I wish if we were doing world museums, I would definitely like to include the Bata Museum, which is the biggest shoe museum of the world. And you know, we have a big connection with the Bata Museum because it is Thomas and Soumya Bata who visited India and brought Bata on Indian map during their lifetime. They were the shoe manufacturers. And this museum is not outside anywhere, but in the house of Mr. Sehgal in the place called Jangpura. Next, please. Can we go to the next?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is his house. So you'll actually get a chance. It is run by his family now. There's a lovely little coffee shop. Again, you know, I have taken a couple of my visitors after a visit to Humayun Tomb. We go here, we can sit and have a cup of coffee. And sometimes his daughter, granddaughter, grandchildren are there and they tell us lovely, lovely stories. You can walk through, see his works very intimately. These are those unknown, he's known in the art field, but you know, these are not names that you will hear of every day, but his works are absolutely modern. But just look at this one sculpture outside, which shows kind of an upward movement. Everybody is holding a globe and they're on a globe. His work is always very symbolic and conceptual about having your own identities or building a life for yourself, building a world of yourself. Next, please. That's him. And the work on the right is the one which belongs to the Bata Museum. Well, it belongs to the owners of the Bata. One of the very highly, one of the expensive works, highly bidded works at Sotheby's. And it's called Uprising. This work is symbolic of the uprising that he saw during the time before the partition. And the uprising is so beautifully shown. He said, I saw these laborers, I saw the poor people all wanting to get up and protest and have a voice. Look at the way he has erected the figures. It's modern, but look at the stick-like figures. They bring out that kind of identity of those poor, humble people. And yet the positioning of the arms, the whole, the composition itself has so much of movement. It screams of that kind of, that scream of wanting to get up and show the uprising. This work is also influenced very much from the works of Giacometti, which again tends to elongate figures, stretch them out of their normal anatomical kind of spaces. So artists, of course, have their own ways of creating. Every work of art talks so much about their lives and them. And I hope you will get a chance to visit this beautiful, humble, small, but yet very selected museum. Next, please. I suppose this might be the last slide we have. Can we go to the next?
Yes.
Yes, of course.
This is the last slide.
Kuntil, I don't think I've done very bad on time.
Yeah, we are good. We are good.
No, you are being a thorough gentleman. I can see that. So,
Yeah.
of course, let us take more people. That is my motto for this whole month or so as I talk to you all. And we still have one more section left, which has some very exciting and museums which you might not have heard about. And I'm really hoping to share those with you. I hope today's collection has again created an interest, because I used to ask some friends, have you been to the Teen Murti Museum? They said, Teen Murti Museum, what is that? I said, haven't you ever seen those three figures in the middle of the road near Chanakyapuri? She said, yeah, those three soldiers. What are they doing there? And I said, you know, that was actually a sculpture done by the British to honor Jodhpur, Hyderabad and Mysore state for their contribution in World War I in 1922. And because it was done during the time of the battle, that house was for the commander-in-chief. They said, okay, and what's inside? I said, the Nehru Museum. So there are things just round the corner. We might be crossing it every day and we don't realize it could be a museum. So go and explore. And that will be all for today. Thank you so much.
Seema, maybe we will take one or two questions here.